The scent of freshly baked bread and sizzling garlic filled the air as Chef Daniel worked his magic in the kitchen. The clatter of plates, the rhythmic chopping of vegetables, and the occasional burst of laughter from his staff made the restaurant feel alive. Tonight was a busy night, but that was nothing new for him. He thrived in the chaos, loved the rush of service, and found comfort in the routine. But nothing could have prepared him for what was about to unfold. Just as he was finishing up a perfectly seared steak, his eyes caught something unusual at the far end of the dining room. A woman, young and pale, was sitting alone by the window. She wasn't eating. She wasn't even looking at the menu. Her hands were wrapped around a glass of water, her fingers trembling slightly. Something about her struck him. There was a sadness in her posture, a heaviness in her eyes that made it impossible to look away. Daniel wasn't one to interfere in people's personal lives, but there was something about her that made him hesitate. Before he could decide whether to approach, a waitress leaned in and whispered, "She's been sitting there for almost an hour, chef. Hasn't ordered a thing." That was unusual. People came to his restaurant for comfort food, for celebration, for warmth. But this woman, she looked lost, like she didn't belong anywhere. Without a second thought, he wiped his hands on his apron and walked over. "Ma'am," he said gently, standing beside her table. "I hope I'm not intruding, but is everything all right?" She looked up at him, startled, as if she had been pulled from a faraway place. Her eyes were red, swollen, like she had been crying for days. And then, barely above a whisper, she asked, "Do you believe in miracles?" The question caught him off guard. He glanced around the restaurant, the warm glow of candlelight reflecting off wine glasses, the chatter of happy diners filling the space. It was the last place he expected to be asked something so profound. He hesitated. "I'd like to." A faint, almost ghostly smile crossed her lips. "I used to." The weight in her voice was undeniable. Daniel pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. He didn't know why he felt compelled to, but something told him this wasn't a conversation to ignore. "My name is Evelyn," she said, staring down at her shaking hands. "A few months ago, I lost my baby during childbirth." Daniel felt a sharp pang in his chest. He had seen loss before. He had lost people too, but he knew there was no grief like a mother losing her child. "I'm so sorry," he said sincerely. Evelyn nodded, pressing her lips together, as if trying to keep herself together. "I thought I could handle it. I thought maybe time would help, but it doesn't. Every day I wake up hoping it was just a bad dream." She let out a bitter laugh. "But the worst part is that it wasn't just an accident. Something happened that night. Something I still can't explain." Daniel leaned in, his curiosity now fully piqued. "What do you mean?" Evelyn hesitated, glancing around nervously, as if afraid someone might overhear. Then, in a barely audible whisper, she said, "The morgue." The word sent a chill down Daniel's spine. That night, after they told me my baby didn't make it, I wasn't thinking straight. I needed to see her, hold her. I begged them to let me in, but they refused, said it wasn't necessary. She swallowed hard. So I snuck in. Daniel's heart pounded. He could barely breathe as he waited for her to continue. I made my way through the dimly lit hallways. The cold air, the smell of antiseptic. I remember every detail. And then I saw him. Daniel frowned. "Who?" Evelyn's lips quivered. "The doctor. The one who had been in the delivery room with me. He was standing there. But he wasn't alone." She took a deep breath, her voice breaking. "He was holding my baby." Daniel's mind raced. He couldn't make sense of what she was saying. "I thought I was losing it," Evelyn continued. but I swear she was breathing. Her tiny chest was rising and falling. She was alive. Daniel's breath hitched. But they told you. They told me she was gone, Evelyn said, her voice filled with something between anger and heartbreak. But I saw her. I know what I saw. Daniel sat back, his pulse hammering in his ears. This wasn't just grief talking. There was something more to this. What happened next? He asked. Evelyn's eyes darkened. He saw me, and then everything went black. The air between them grew heavy. Daniel could feel the weight of her words pressing down on him, suffocating. When I woke up, I was back in my hospital bed. They told me I must have fainted, that the stress was making me see things. But I know what I saw, Chef. I know my baby was alive. And I know they took her. Daniel swallowed hard. He had always believed in logic, in facts, in things that could be explained. But as he looked into Evelyn's desperate, pleading eyes, he felt something he couldn't shake. Something was very, very wrong, and he was about to find out just how deep this story went. Daniel sat in silence, his fingers drumming lightly against the wooden table. The low hum of the restaurant around them felt distant, almost unreal, compared to the weight of Evelyn's words. She wasn't crazy. He could see it in her eyes. The raw desperation, the certainty buried beneath layers of exhaustion and grief. Whatever had happened that night, she truly believed it. And that meant one of two things. Either her mind was playing tricks on her, or something far more disturbing was going on. He exhaled slowly. Evelyn, do you have any proof? She bit her lip, shaking her head. Nothing. No records. No evidence. Just what I saw. Daniel hesitated. He wanted to believe her, but the story was too unreal. A doctor stealing a baby, faking a death. Why? Hospitals were supposed to save lives, not hide them. Evelyn must have sensed his doubt, because her voice turned sharper. I know it sounds crazy, Chef, but tell me this. Why would they refuse to let me see her? Why did they act so strange? When I begged to say goodbye, her hands clenched into fists. And why did that doctor look so guilty? Daniel thought about that for a moment. Hospitals had strict protocols, sure, but refusing a mother a final moment with her child, that didn't sit right. Who was the doctor? He asked. Evelyn's eyes flickered with something close to fear. Dr. Collins. Daniel frowned. He wasn't deeply involved in the medical world, but that name felt familiar. Then it hit him. He had catered an event at the hospital a while back, a charity dinner for some of the top doctors in the city. Dr. Collins had been there, shaking hands, flashing a carefully rehearsed smile. A respected man, someone with power, someone untouchable. Evelyn took a shaky breath. I've tried everything, Chef. I asked for records, but they told me it was a sensitive case. I went to the police, and they brushed me off. No one will listen to me. She clenched her jaw. But I know my daughter is alive, and I need to find her. Daniel knew what she was asking without saying it. She wanted help. She wanted someone to believe her, to stand beside her when no one else would. He wasn't a detective. He wasn't a hero. He was just a chef. But something about this woman, about her unwavering belief, made it impossible to walk away. I don't know what I can do, he admitted, but I'll help you. Relief flooded Evelyn's face. It was the first time she had looked anything close to hopeful in a long time. That night, after the last customer had left and the restaurant was locked up, Daniel found himself sitting at his desk, scrolling through article after article about the hospital, about Dr. Collins. There wasn't much, just the usual praise, awards, and interviews. But something caught his eye. A few months back, around the time Evelyn's baby was born. There had been a quiet lawsuit against the hospital. A couple had accused the staff of negligence. After their newborn was declared stillborn under unclear circumstances, the case had been dismissed. Daniel's stomach twisted. Was this a pattern? He picked up his phone and called Evelyn. She answered immediately, her voice anxious. "There's something going on," he said. "You're not the only one." Evelyn was silent for a long moment. Then she whispered, "I knew it." The next few days were a blur of late-night phone calls, hushed meetings, and endless dead ends. No one wanted to talk. Nurses who had been on duty that night either claimed they remembered nothing or refused to answer at all. And Dr. Collins, he was impossible to reach. But then, a break. A janitor. An older man named Henry, who had worked at the hospital for over 20 years. He agreed to meet them in secret, away from prying eyes. They found him in a dimly lit parking lot behind an old diner. He looked nervous, his hands stuffed into his jacket pockets. "You shouldn't be asking questions," he said, without greeting. "This isn't a game." Evelyn stepped forward. "Please, I just need to know what happened that night." Henry sighed, glancing around as if expecting someone to be watching. Then, in a hushed voice, he said, "You're not wrong. Something's off in that hospital. I've been cleaning those halls for years, and I've seen things I shouldn't have." Daniel's pulse quickened. "Like what?" Henry hesitated. "Like babies disappearing." Evelyn gasped, covering her mouth. "I don't know the details," Henry admitted. "But I know this. Dr. Collins and a few others, they handle things their own way. I've seen him escorting parents out in the middle of the night, whispering things I couldn't hear. And I've seen files disappear. One day, a baby's name is on the record, and the next, gone." Daniel's skin crawled. Evelyn grabbed Henry's arm. "Do you think my baby is alive?" Henry looked at her, something unreadable in his expression. Then, slowly, he nodded. Evelyn broke into quiet sobs. Daniel clenched his fists. This wasn't just grief anymore. This was real, and they were going to find out the truth. But what none of them knew was that someone was already watching, and they didn't like what was being uncovered. The night air felt heavier than usual. As Daniel and Evelyn left the diner, Henry had disappeared into the shadows, his warning lingering in their ears. Something was deeply wrong at that hospital. Babies weren't just disappearing. Someone was making them disappear. And if what Henry said was true, Evelyn's daughter could still be alive. But that meant someone powerful had a reason to keep it a secret. And they had just started asking too many questions. Daniel noticed it first. The black car parked across the street. The engine was off. The windows tinted. But there was no mistaking it. Someone was watching them. "Don't look," he muttered under his breath. "Just keep walking." Evelyn's breath hitched, but she did as he said. They hurried to his car, trying to act normal. But Daniel's hands were shaking as he started the engine. The black car didn't move. Not yet, but the message was clear. They were getting too close. Back at his apartment, Evelyn paced the floor, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. "What if they already know?" she whispered. "What if they're listening right now?" Daniel ran, a hand through his hair, his mind racing. "We need to be smart about this. We need proof." Evelyn stopped pacing. Henry said files disappeared. But what if there's something they missed? It was a long shot, but they didn't have any other leads. They had to go back to where it all started. The hospital. The next night, they parked 2 blocks away and approached the hospital on foot. Daniel's heart pounded in his chest. As they slipped inside, Evelyn led the way, her body tense with every step. The halls were eerily quiet, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. They made their way to the records room. The door was locked. Of course it was. But Evelyn had spent the last few months being dismissed, ignored, and silenced. She wasn't giving up now. She searched the nearby desks, pulling open drawers until she found what she needed. A keycard. Daniel exhaled. "You're terrifying." She gave him a shaky smile. "Let's hope that's enough to scare them." The door clicked open, revealing rows of filing cabinets and computers. They didn't have much time. Evelyn went straight for the computer, while Daniel searched the cabinets. Files had been removed, just like Henry said. But Daniel noticed something strange. There were gaps. Entire weeks missing. He grabbed his phone and started taking pictures. "This is evidence," he murmured. Evelyn, meanwhile, was scrolling through the database, and then she stopped. Her fingers trembled as she pointed at the screen. "There, a transfer." Daniel leaned over her shoulder. The file showed that a newborn had been listed as deceased, but then, 3 days later, moved to a private facility. Evelyn's breath caught. "She's alive." Before Daniel could respond, the lights in the hallway flickered. Footsteps. Someone was coming. Evelyn quickly emailed the file to herself and erased any trace of what she had done. They barely had time to slip out of the room before the door opened behind them. Dr. Collins. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes were sharp. "You shouldn't be here," he said quietly. Evelyn stepped forward. "Where is she?" Collins tilted his head. "I don't know what you're talking about." Daniel clenched his fists. "Cut the act. We know she was transferred. We have the file." For the first time, Collins hesitated. Then, with a sigh, he closed the door behind him. "You don't understand. You were never supposed to find out." Evelyn's voice broke. "She's my daughter." Collins looked at her, something almost like regret flashing across his face. "She was never meant to die," he admitted. "But there are people, powerful people, who make sure things go their way." Daniel's blood ran cold. "You sold her, didn't you?" Collins didn't answer. He didn't have to. Evelyn's knees buckled, but Daniel caught her before she fell. Collins exhaled. "I can't undo what's been done, but I can tell you where she is." Evelyn looked up, hope and fear warring in her eyes. "Where?" Collins hesitated. Then in a low voice, he gave them an address. A private home, not a hospital, not an orphanage, a buyer. Evelyn didn't wait. She ran. Daniel was right behind her. The house was in an upscale neighborhood, surrounded by tall gates and security cameras. But Evelyn didn't care. She pounded on the door until someone answered. A woman, elegant, wealthy, but behind her stood a little girl, no more than a few months old. Dark curls, familiar eyes. Evelyn's breath caught. She knew. Before the woman could close the door, Evelyn pushed past her. The baby whimpered, startled. But when Evelyn reached for her, she stopped, as if she knew. Tears streamed down Evelyn's face. "My baby!" The woman protested, but Daniel had already called the police. It was over. The woman protested, but Daniel had already called the police. It was over. The investigation that followed uncovered a horrifying truth. A network of illegal adoptions, orchestrated by people who thought they were untouchable. But Evelyn's story made waves. The hospital was exposed. Dr. Collins was arrested, and the system that had stolen so many children finally started to crumble. But none of that mattered as much as this. Evelyn had her daughter back. Daniel stood beside her in the courtroom, months later, watching as she officially got her name restored on her baby's birth certificate. She turned to him, smiling through her tears. "I wouldn't have found her without you." Daniel chuckled. "I'm just a chef." Evelyn shook her head. No, you're a friend. As they walked outside into the sunlight, the past finally behind them, Daniel realized something. He did believe in miracles after all.